Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
And I'm stuck. He's looking gut with his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you.
And for the second year running, it is victory here in Mexico City for Max Verstappen.
That is mission accomplished, Max. And a very, very special number 14. Fantastic.
Amazing, guys. What a fantastic race again. 14 wins. Unbelievable. What a season.
Well, I made that is a new record. 14 Grand Prix victories. That's the most race wins we've ever had in a season. So, absolutely congratulations. Very, very well done.
Yeah, double podium as well. That's amazing here in Mexico. Well done, guys.
There it is. There's the call right there. The final stretch of that Mexican Grand Prix. Finishing up today in Mexico City. Distrito Federal, where we were so bummed out, my heavens, not to see Checo walk away with a W. But as usual, Alex, Kirry, and Dan Jimenez joining you on a race Sunday. Hopefully you got to, hopefully you stayed awake for, I don't know, a stretch of about 30 laps there after some shenanigans kind of in the middle there. But Dan, your thoughts on a Mexico Grand Prix that saw Max with a record-setting 14 wins on the season. Everybody's excited. Mexico got their champion on the podium there, and yet I was super bored. Now what do I do with myself?
Yeah. This is one of the races where you just kind of have to look at the silver linings around the other interesting stories because the actual action on the track just it wasn't what we saw in Austin, that's for sure. But the storylines were there. I think my favorite part of the weekend was the mariachi band playing the Formula One
F1
theme.
theme, yeah. I did love that.
That was great. I think there should be like local takes on the Formula One theme everywhere we go.
You go to the Hungaroring and you get whatever Hungarian music is. All right.
Right.
You go to Bavaria. You get the accordions out. You get the dudes in the lederhosen playing it. I mean, Spain, same thing. You get the full-on flamenco guitars going on. This stuff writes itself, Dan. It was an amazing thing. You got to get that one, too. One of my favorite memes is the guy who plays the sad F1 music theme, like on an off-pitch flute. I want them to invite that guy on a bad recorder to come out and do it. Maybe that's like on a race like today when it ends like that. That's what you get. When it's not exciting, Max passes the finish line, and you have that cruddy oboe or recorder or whatever is giving you that music. That's an amazing take. And then rock and roll, obviously in America.
That could be a pretty cool rock and roll theme. Yeah,
Donnie and Marie next year at in Vegas. Look, this stuff writes it's freaking self. So, but in the end, here's another little bit of fun news. Danny Rick, driver of the day. The guy powered through. I don't know where he found performance out of that McLaren, and out of all the McLarens that you would think be on the track, find some sort of pace. Danny Rick ends driver of the day, and a nice little finish for him there in Mexico.
Yeah, even after a time penalty, I think he bumped into Tsunoda there, which I know he hit another driver, but that's a tough one for me because he had been on Tsunoda for a few corners there. And Yuki should have been watching his mirrors, I think, closer. And in my opinion, turned in a bit into Daniel, but whatever. So Riccardo then, switches for softs and just way, up the field, just started gaining all that time with a little bit of fire in his belly.
Well, after all this, though, you get the finish, the podium. Mercedes was this close all weekend long. It was a weird qualifying session, too, yesterday. As I was kind of watching it, everybody was like the blazing fast Mercedes in FP3. And then you're going, but, I think you're probably going to see Red Bull sandbagging a little bit. The tire temperatures, the track temperatures yesterday just did not hook up for Mercedes. And that blistering pace, I think, went away. And then I think they lost some of their groove in qualifying because of it. But it was another weekend where whatever updates they brought to Austin didn't really pan out super well. I think I heard George saying that this last weekend, but then those same updates apparently in Mexico worked out really well. And I think everybody's waiting to see at least some mix up, and maybe Lewis could get on the on the top step of the podium there. But a nice weekend for Mercedes, and I don't know if that's a super big bummer for Ferrari that they were falling so far back. Everybody's been waiting for a weekend like this where you had those top three teams performing, and you kind of got it. But Ferrari, the short end of the stick today, finishing behind the other two teams.
Yeah, they kind of flubbed qualifying there. Like Charles had some sort of an engine issue, it looks like. Got really slow down the straights during qualifying. And then, those guys just never really found pace during the race. And again, I think what is winning this for Red Bull is just their tire management. It was another race where I thought that the tire strategy difference between Lewis and Max was going to make it closer, with Lewis going hards and very clearly a one-stopper. When Max went to mediums, I thought he's going to go for the two-stop race, and then just stayed out there and managed his tires and finished 15 seconds ahead of Lewis. And so, Red Bull's ability to manage their tires, and I mean Max's ability, to be honest, as a driver is just it's impeccable. It's pretty wild. So, I mean, well-deserved 14th and record-breaking win in a season for Max. But I think Mercedes is they're getting closer. I think that they're starting to find a bit more of their groove. They took a little bit of a chunk out of the points lead from Ferrari, and I think that's going to make these last 2 races pretty exciting for that kind of second position on the constructors championship.
So you get that nice podium of Verstappen, Hamilton, then Perez on that third step there. What was George's deal this weekend? And it just seems like all year long, when George has been sticking around and when you think he's going to be able to stick his nose in and plug himself in for a win, he's been super disappointing on the performance side, because the car seemed like it was there. He was upset at himself in qualifying for the track limits thing, but it just seems like George really has had a really good year while also being totally forgettable.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, he didn't have a really great start off the line, too. I felt like he was in that, it was like the catbird seat, right? Like he's in second, which is the preferred place to start at Mexico, because it's a 800-meter sprint down to turn 1. And so there's like some crazy streak of, I don't know how many races in a row of, by the time you get to turn 1, the person in, the pole sitter is not in first. And so I thought he was going to get that toe, but it was more Lewis. And yeah, he lost a couple spots. I think he lost a spot to Sergio right off the bat. So I don't know if he was maybe playing it a bit more cautious after being the enemy last week and pegging Carlos. Who knows? But I'm with you. Like he was making so much noise in the first half of the season and being Mr. Consistent. And in the second half of the season, he's just kind of like either right on the podium or right off the podium. And it seems like Lewis has been the more exciting one of that pairing.
I was thinking about how, Alonzo had another disappointing DNF, and the guy, I start to think and look back, Dan, and go, okay, this guy doesn't like this team. Like there's a reason he's leaving. There's a reason he left the way that he did, And so then I actually got on today, and somebody had posted, I think, one of the subreddits about F1 and his 2022 season, and looking at all the stuff. First couple races of the year: engine problem race 1, engine problem race 2. That's where he gets his first DNF. Hydraulic failure in Australia. In Italy, hit by Schumacher, didn't DNF there. Slow pit stop in Miami, loses points because of the 2 post-race penalties as well, but had an extremely slow one there. Traffic in the last qualifying attempt, 4th engine of the season they had to use in that one. Canada, engine problem, virtual safety cars, loses points there. Couldn't do the last qualifying run at Silverstone. Broken floor in qualifying in Austria. Belgium hit by Hamilton in the race. Damaged car. Blocked in Q2 in the Netherlands. Engine problem. 3rd DNF in Monza. Engine problem in I want to say I think that's Turkey. His 4th DNF or no, that's the one you were at. Where's that at?
Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore. Did he end up not finishing that one? I think he might have.
Correct.
Yeah, fourth
I think
DNF.
both of the Alpines didn't make it.
4th DNF of the year was the race in Singapore. Japan gets mad at his team because of the bad strategy, if you'll recall. Takes his sixth engine of the freaking season in Austin. Grid penalty, gets hit by Stroll, obviously, and then this race in Mexico, his car petered off at the end. 5th DNF of the year. If you're wondering why he's moving away from Alpine, the car looks deceptively fast. It's also got a lot of problems, and the team might have some problems that we're not seeing too. So now you're seeing kind of a little bit of the background, I guess, of why he's leaving and moving teams.
Geez, yeah, that's wild. When you list it all out, he's had a terrible season, and it's a kind of a miracle. He's in 9th on the driver's standing table. I would have thought with a list like that, he would have been definitely in the bottom 10.
Zone.
But
yeah.
I guess when everything does come together, he really gets a lot out of it. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting move for him to go over to Aston Martin. We'll see how he does next year. Hopefully, he gets better luck.
I think my favorite thing, though, of the entire day, hopefully I can get this audio to work, Lando Norris being totally Lando. On the one hand, like you and I have both been like, when is this kid going to get his first win? It's just nothing has been able to really hook up for all of McLaren this year, and really for Lando especially. But this is him post-race being asked the question by Sky Sports.
Well, good day for the team, Lando. Both cars in the points. Why didn't at the start you dropped down to P10?
There's only 2 positions. So I'm run down to turn 1.
That's not optimal.
You should try driving, mate.
Yeah.
There it is. You should try driving, Ted. Give it a shot.
Dude, Ted Kravitz is on everybody's you-know-what list. He ticked off Red Bull, and they're not giving any interviews to Sky Sports.
Oh, my
so
gosh.
It seems like the drivers all have it out for him. He's persona non grata.
Yeah, it's interesting because on the one hand, like from a sports journalist perspective, I go, let these guys ask the questions. And it's never good when an athlete looks at you and goes, you try to hit a three-pointer, dude. Why don't you throw that touchdown pass, you know? And also speaking from experience, is just being the chubby sports commentator side of things. It's not a great feeling when you ask an athlete like straight up, like, what's the problem, man? You had a really tough start. And yet at the same time, you're expected to ask those questions too. So
yeah, it's your job.
It's like a mix of Ted Kravitz, like he's the ultimate nosy dude, and on the one hand, you kind of want that from the perspective of you and I consuming it, but on the other hand, these guys have a hard time with it. So that's pretty wild. In the end of it, though, again, this is I was looking at Fernando after the race, and he's just like, yeah, there's another problem with this car. Not a shocker. We had another problem with this number 14 car. At the end of everything, though, we're kind of coming down to the last 2 races of the year. Max got his 14th record-breaking race. Does he let up? Does Red Bull let up? That doesn't seem like the Christian Horner way. But at the same time, it's like, what do you do now when the thing's so wrapped up and every championship, all your dreams have come true? He was wearing the championship helmet that we found out has 22-karat gold leaf actually laid onto it. So everything's beautiful for this team. At what point do you say, hey, let's not try to go all out here at every race and maybe start looking at what next year's development looks like? Or how did they handle the last 2 races here this season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that for a few weeks now, we keep thinking they've got it all locked up. They're going to take it a little bit easier. Maybe they give Sergio more of the strategic priority, but week after week, Max keeps coming out and just banging out laps. I mean, every single lap on that stint on that medium tire that he did was in the 1:22s, 22s, except for the virtual safety car laps. Like, that is incredible consistency to get over the course of, I don't know how many laps that was, 40 some odd laps on that set of tires, like all within the same 1 second band is just insane. Like, Max is just in a completely different dimension. And so, yeah, I think they're going to come out and they're going to go for 15 wins and 16 wins. And, but it brings up an interesting question of what do you try to learn in the last 2 races of the year, especially considering they're going to have less wind tunnel time than they thought they were going to get because of finally this penalty came down for the cost cap breach. And so, what can be learned in these next 2 weeks to try and make up for some of that lost wind tunnel time? I don't know. Like, maybe they try to prioritize some aero testing during practice.
I noticed too. You put this out there too that the wind tunnel that Red Bull uses is one of the oldest that is out there, and I just assume that if you have a wind tunnel that you're working with, it's going to be top notch, especially if you're a team like Red Bull. So, what is the situation there? Like, can they just spend a bunch of money? I mean, is that part of the cost cap thing? Like, can you just buy a new, wind tunnel that you can use, or is that something that has to be wound into another cost somewhere else? Because I mean, if they have a cruddy kind of below par, aero testing kind of facility, and they're not able to use very much time of it, like what's the point of having something like that if it's not going to be top notch, especially if you're Red Bull?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had just learned that they've kind of repurposed an old kind of World War II era RAF wind tunnel for race car testing because it has that rolling road in it, and it's not a full size wind tunnel. It's a scale tunnel. So it's like they're running a 60% scale model of the car, and you can still do that and scale up and down all the math to make it work for what a full size car is going to do. So I think that to answer your question, I'm not quite sure on how it works into the cost cap. I have to imagine that if you want to go put some improvements into your wind tunnel that you own, then that's going to count in your development costs. But other teams, they have to pay, if they don't own their own wind tunnel, they have to pay to rent, wind tunnel time. But it's the time in the wind tunnel and the time doing CFD is all controlled and limited by the FIA, depending on where you finish in the last season. And so Red Bull's already on track to only have 70% of the average, and now that's going to go down by 10% to 63%. So I think that it's going to definitely impact their performance next year and into the following year. But I don't think that they would necessarily be needing to put a ton of money into improving their wind tunnel. That seems to have, done them a good job in the last few years.
I'm looking at some of these constructor standings, some of the driver standings here. Checo moved ahead of Leclerc by 5 points. He's 5 points clear of him right now going into these last two races. Does Sergio end up getting caught by Charles and passed up? Does Charles end up being the second place in the driver's standing, or is Sergio going to end up just kind of pulling away in these last two races here? Has Ferrari just hit the wall here at this point?
It kind of feels like they've hit the wall the last couple of races. We'll see. It's a tire management race more in Brazil than Abu Dhabi. I think Abu Dhabi might play more into Ferrari's hands. So I think it's going to be close. I'm going to be watching it closely. I think up and down the kind of midfield, there are a lot of really interesting close races, like between Sainz and Hamilton. Then even Hamilton catching George, maybe leapfrogging him. Right. Could be interesting. And so there's kind of three guys right there fighting just below Sergio and Charles. So I believe that Charles can do it. Let's kind of put the positive vibes out there into the universe that he can, because I think it would be a big disappointment after the start of the season that he had for him to not come in second.
And think about the promise that Ferrari had going into the season. Then they're likely going to finish 250 points clear of Red Bull, like not able to catch. I mean, the amount of points that they have is insane. I think it'd be cool for Checo to win second there, although it doesn't mean much to him. Obviously, he just goes in and says, I want to try to win a world championship. Mercedes is 40 points short of Ferrari right now. Does Ferrari have too much to be able to, to get run down by Mercedes? Could Mercedes somehow flip it and end up second in the drivers in the constructor standings? I mean, that would be the most Ferrari thing to do in the last two races, to give up 40 points to Mercedes.
Definitely possible. I mean, if Lewis sneaks out a win at either of these tracks, but I think he's particularly good at Brazil. Sneaks in a win, and Ferrari does like they did today and finish 4th, 5th, and I mean that's 25 points for a win. I think they could close that 40-point gap in two races. Definitely possible.
Anything else, like in terms of? I did see that Danny Rick today did in an interview say, I can say with full confidence that I'm not going to be sitting behind the wheel on the grid next year, which I think we all kind of knew at this point, but to hear it is an absolute bummer. I don't know how a guy like that doesn't find a seat when you have a bunch of people that are less capable on other teams that you just go, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if he's lost favor with everybody, if people don't want to deal with him. Maybe he is harder to deal with than we thought. But Danny Rick not being on the grid when he's still capable, it seems like a weird thing to me.
Yeah, it's weird. He seems like maybe he's a trickier guy than his, kind of smiley personality puts on. I think in that, Drive to Survive, kind of back behind the scenes of making that decision to just leave Red Bull in the prime of his career, just a little bit of a head scratcher, especially choosing to go to Renault at the time that wasn't performing super well. So, maybe he's a tricky guy. I don't think he's got this like black dot on him for, other teams to not go and race. Gunter Steiner for Haas said that, like, look, he has my phone number and we have an open seat. So, I think he was almost saying like, he's Danny Rick is almost too proud to call Haas and, ask for a ride.
He's like looking, like Haas in front of him. He's looking past him going, oh, boy, nobody out there, huh? And they're like, me, right here. It's like, oh, shoot, no team out there. Well, I'll see you guys later. Yeah, it's I get it. You've been racing at the top, with with blue blood, teams and Red Bull, of course, where you go, hey, racing for McLaren and racing for even Renault and of course, Red Bull before that, like, it would feel probably like a massive demotion. But again, wouldn't you just rather stay in a seat in F1? Or I guess like you were saying, he'd probably have a better shot next year and looking around and going, look, some of these teams are gonna cool on, some of these other drivers, whether it's maybe on the Alfa Romeo team trying to sneak in after Zhou Guanyu next year, or to try to kind of sneak in and be on one of these other teams with a stronger team situation. And maybe that's what he's looking for.
Yeah, that does seem like the dice that he's rolling. What's interesting is on the Mercedes side, Lewis has been pretty vocal about saying he wants another contract to keep racing. And you'd think that, 7-time world champion, that Mercedes would just give him a contract, but they haven't yet. And Lewis has, I think, really picked up his performance in the last few weeks. I wonder if that's a little bit of him just still showing the team. He's like, hey guys, I'm still the second best driver on the grid behind Max, if not the first best driver if I'm in good equipment. So we'll, hopefully Lewis gets another contract, and that would, lock up that seat. One that seems like there had been rumors around Danny Rick kind of sniffing for.
Do you think that they would sour on Lewis? I feel like that marriage between he and Toto could never be broken up.
Yeah, it would be very surprising. I think if Lewis had kind of really mailed it in this year and been terrible to work with after giving up early on the season, then maybe. But I think he's probably here to stay for at least another 3 years, is my guess.
From a team standpoint, you see this happen in sports a lot. Teams will just kind of go radio silent a little bit when you start talking about contract negotiations. And at that point, it becomes a little bit of a tryout. You see this across sports, and guys are like, the whole idea of I'm in a contract year, I better show up and perform. And when the team shuts up and they don't say anything and they say, yeah, that's something we could look at in the offseason, then he goes, I've got a little bit more motivation to beat George to figure out what I'm going to do, long term. And so it's smart on the team's side of things, because that's what they're going to want, is to make sure that he's giving in the best. And so I like it. I like the move here. Before we get out, you've got in a couple of weeks heading down to Brazil. This whole grid, this track at Interlagos. This is one that is pretty interesting because it's one of these far-flung places compared to a lot of the other races. I remember last year, I think it was just week to week they were racing between Mexico and Brazil. And if I remember right, a lot of these teams had a hard time getting down to Brazil. They couldn't get flights. They couldn't get cargo ships. And do you remember this? It was like Ferrari showed up maybe 2 days before FP1. It was like trying to set up their camp, and so this year, a couple weeks between that split down to Interlagos. What does this track kind of favor? And throw Red Bull out; they're not a part of this conversation. Who does it favor? Somebody who's still in the mix and looking to make some moves here.
I think it favors Mercedes in their recent upgrades. I think that it's high downforce track, and I think it plays into Lewis's skills. And if it rains, then the Rain Masters will kind of come to the top. So Sergio and Lewis, and I think Lando's really good in the rain as well. So it's always a high probability of rain down there. But I think that's who I'm looking at. But there's just like so many great memories from Brazil. I think it was the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix where the championship was determined, I think, on the last lap of the race, and it was the last race of the season. It's just a really cool place. It's a high downforce track, lots of long swooping corners, and so whoever can produce the most grip and hold on to their tires the longest will win.
All right, there you go. We'll be back again this week. Dan will bring some a midweek episode for folks, and so we're going to make you do your engineering homework, and we're going to jump into another side of F1 that we maybe hadn't seen or hadn't jumped into yet. Hey, on the way out here, I found something for you, just to make sure we kind of go out in style here.
Yes.
This is the way they should all be done. So, the best rendition of the F1 Open, the entire calendar. I don't know why they wouldn't do this in every place. So, and the best part is seeing guys like Mick Schumacher with his music behind him. It's like couldn't be further from Yuki Tsunoda with this mariachi music going on. So there you go. Dan, appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you again later this week.
Looking forward to it.
All right, there you go. For Dan, I'm Alex. We'll talk to you next week, everybody, on Mode Push, another edition in the books.